Is November the 21st, 2013. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the OSU Library, and today I'm in Norman, Oklahoma at the National Weather Center to speak with Dr. Ken Crawford, emeritus regents professor and co-developer of the Oklahoma Mesonet. He worked for the University of Oklahoma, and he's going to talk to us a little bit today about the Mesonet and how all that got started, and we'll just work our way through all that. So thank you for having us today.
My pleasure. I love to talk about the Oklahoma Mesonet.
Okay. Well, let's start with learning a little bit about you. Could you tell us when and where you were born?
I was born in Winslow, Arizona. My mother was out there due to World War II, and I was born in May of 1943.
And did you have brothers and sisters?
I had two brothers. They're both younger, and they were born in Texas because we gradually moved back east and settled in the Dallas-Fort Worth area of North Texas.
And what did your parents do for a living?
My father was always sick, so I never knew him. And he got sick when I was in about the 6th or 7th grade. And my mother was thrust into a job at a time when it was not good for females to be looking for work, especially if they wanted a salary worth working for. So she worked for the Santa Fe Railroad as a stenographer and a clerk, and she was just a happy-go-lucky lady in spite of all that she had to deal with.
And where did you go to elementary school?
I went in a town called Cleburne, Texas. It's about 30 miles south-southwest of Fort Worth. And I went to several elementary schools there in Cleburne.
Okay. And then high school?
To Cleburne High School, and I graduated in 1961.
Okay. And what was your favorite subject?
I just enjoyed it all. I was not particularly the best student, but I learned to work hard out of high school. And what I didn't have as native intellect, I made up for by blood, sweat, and tears. And I liked it all. I didn't like English. Maybe that's the best way to say it. And I paid the price for that, to be real honest with you. Because I didn't like English, I didn't do too well in freshman English at the University of Texas.
Okay. So did you go directly from high school into college the following fall?
Yes, I did. As an 18-year-old, I went to the University of Texas to major in meteorology, and I also began working for the U.S. government as an intern for the U.S. National Weather Service.
So you were interested in meteorology in high school then?
Well, one would think that, but I didn't know that at the time. I just knew what my mother said: if you get any kind of assistance, don't blow it, because I won't have an ability to repay anything. So I knew I had to take advantage of every opportunity that came my way.
And then, so why meteorology then?
Well, the U.S. Weather Service was recruiting in Cleburne, Texas, and they had a regional office in Fort Worth, so it was a natural, and my high school math professor knew of that. He invited them down. He said, "I want you to meet somebody," and he introduced me to them, and were it not for that high school math teacher, I might not have been able to go this pathway.
Well, that's a good thing then. What was his name? Do you want to say it on record?
E. Rex Arnold.
Okay.
He was tough.
But he came through for you, huh?
He did. He was kind-hearted, and he was tough for a reason. He knew we needed to be tougher.
So meteorology has a math aspect to it, I take it?
Very much heavy-duty math. It's fair to say that meteorology is nothing but applied physics.
Okay. So once you graduated from there, what next?
Well, I was working for the Weather Service every summer as an intern, and in 1966 I was a graduate of UT Austin, and the Weather Service put me to work at my request in Tallahassee, Florida, where I had indicated I would like to go to school, and for reasons only they know, they granted my request, so I transferred to Tallahassee, and I went to Florida State University to earn a master's degree in meteorology.
Then what?
And then the Weather Service came back to say, we need you because we've given a lot to you. It's time for you to give back to us. And they moved me to New Orleans, Louisiana, and I was a shift-working radar meteorologist for the Weather Service, and eventually left that position a couple of years later and moved to the National Severe Storms Laboratory in Norman, Oklahoma. And that got me connected to the University of Oklahoma and its degree program in meteorology.
So along the way, you had no plans to get a doctorate in meteorology?
It never occurred to me I needed one. It never occurred to me I'd be a research scientist. And it certainly never occurred to me that I might one day teach college classroom of young undergraduates. But every step of the way I was able to adapt.
It's almost like it was predetermined, isn't it?
It seems that way. I don't think I made any mistakes if I look back. I mean, life is always somewhat unknown, but I would say I can't figure out what I would change.
So once you got to Oklahoma, you stayed pretty much?
Well, sort of.
Okay.
I did start back to school at the University of Oklahoma, and it took me almost 10 years from my arrival in Oklahoma to complete the PhD. There's a lot of reasons for that. It was a hard degree. I was family oriented. I had work to do, full-time work. So I did not graduate with a PhD until 1977. And at that point, I transferred back to New Orleans, Louisiana as a shift-working weather forecaster. So I was probably the only one in the whole U.S. Weather Service with a PhD degree working shifts.
And that was by choice or by necessity?
By necessity, and there really wasn't much choice. It was a take it or leave it.
Okay. And then what brought you back to Oklahoma?
Well, I eventually had several transfers inside the U.S. Weather Service. I ended up back in New Orleans again for another round, and out of that job and position of responsibility, I was selected to lead the Oklahoma City office of the National Weather Service into the modernization of all of its technology. And this was about the year 1980.
Before small laptop computers and desk computers.
And smartphones and you name it. Yes.
Okay. And at that point, was the Mesonet even on your radar?
No, not at all.
To use the wrong word.
The Mesonet is a concept that gradually grew based upon my experiences in the Weather Service in Oklahoma City. We moved that office from Oklahoma City, World Rogers, to the North Campus of the University of Oklahoma. We were the first forecast office to move to a university campus. And that sort of began to change things. We became part of the technology transfer, technology development process. We were the end of the food chain, and there were developers, and they manufactured and developed the technology, but then there were users, and that was the office where I worked. And so having a good office, I got to thinking, well, what are our weak links? And it took a while, took maybe 1 or 2 years to see them where we had major floods in Oklahoma and we didn't have any information to speak of. So I said, there's bound to be a better way. And then the Japanese came and they took out their fancy glossy documents and said, look what we have done on the island of Japan. And they had instrumented the whole island with Mesonet-like stations, and they wanted to see, well, what's the American equivalent? And I hated to show that to them because it was all manual, nothing but a stick stuck into a rain gauge to say, how much rain did we have? And a human had to do that. And they read a maximum and minimum temperature, and nothing was automated. And then they'd go type it up, and many of those folks that did this were volunteers. They were often elderly, and so typographical errors were common. And instead of 1 inch of snow, it might have been 10 inches of snow. So those were things that drove me crazy. I just said, this is not good public service. And so evolving was, there's bound to be a better way. The Japanese have already done it.
Did you borrow some of their ideas then?
No. I borrowed their example in the sense that I could point to them as having done exactly what we need to do in America. And so in that sense, I might have borrowed an idea, but not really. We did it our way because technology had changed by the time we had money to spend on the Oklahoma Mesonet. And so it would not have been a good investment to use their same technology.
Well, in those early days, I don't know, how did you get the ball rolling, so to speak?
Well, it was a combination of many things, always is. But the first thing that happened that was favorable was we had a very close relationship with the Oklahoma Department of Public Safety and their network that they know as OLETS, the Oklahoma Law Enforcement Telecommunications System. And that was a very good landline connecting every police office, every sheriff's office, every highway patrol office to a central facility, and you could move data from here to there quickly and reliably. And if the system went down, because they were law enforcement, the telephone companies hopped to it and got it repaired. So I said, we need that tool. So I put that in my back pocket and said, okay, I think I see a communications solution. Now, we need sensors and sites, but to get sensors and sites, we need money and employees. And they all sort of went together. So it was not obvious what we did next, but along comes the Tulsa flood of May 1984. And the Tulsa flood was very well warned for by the office that I oversaw in Tulsa, though I was in Norman at that time, or almost in Norman at that time. The warning didn't go anywhere. So the mayor didn't know we had warned for a major flood. He just said, go back to bed, it's not that bad, when he was interviewed on TV. And so did the public safety official there. And I said, wow, our system failed again. We had a great warning, but nobody knew it except us, those of us inside the forecast office. So there's the problem now. So I got a couple of back pocket solutions. I can identify the problem better and better. Hey, I'll use that problem to coalesce a group of followers. And I built slowly, in the mid-'80s, a group of followers all across the state, many agencies, and I got them to be supportive of the overall effort if we were to do a Tulsa network equivalent. Didn't say that, but we developed, with City of Tulsa's help, we developed a flood warning system, the first of its kind in the nation, for the city of Tulsa. And then what I heard from everybody around was, well, that's great, but when are you going to do this in my town? I said, will you help me find a way to do it in your town? And they all said yes. So these are the slow push towards a good idea.
Well, did they come through with help financially or with?
That was a while later. The next activity that had to occur was I needed to measure the strength of the community's support. If I was the only one that felt this way, then we probably ought not to do it. But if everybody felt this way, well, there's absolutely every reason to do it. So I knew the problem in my mind. I knew some of the solutions. I knew the example from Japan. I had a cast of people across Oklahoma that were believers already. And so we began to have a series of community meetings where we discussed it. And they said, well, we need a proposal. We can't say something about nothing written down. You got to write this down so we know what you're thinking. So we wrote a proposal and put that back on the table, and it was well received. Now we've got a plan, we've got the problem, we've got a telecommunications solution. Now we just need some money, because then we can get employees and sensors.
Okay. So your first stop for funding was?
Well, I'd like to also say what happened with our colleagues at Oklahoma State University.
Okay.
If we had not made them, and they had not been willing to be an equal partner with us, I don't think we could have pulled this off with the Oklahoma legislature. It was in the mid-80s. It was myself and my equivalent, the other co-developer from Oklahoma State University, Professor Ron Elliott. It was us that walked the halls of the state capitol and told them what we had in mind. And their first look when we walked in the door is, what are you doing befriending this guy? They couldn't believe that Oklahoma State was cooperating with OU or vice versa. But we said, look, come on, this doesn't have anything to do with loyalties. It doesn't have anything to do with parties. It has everything to do with public safety. So out of that, we developed a strong agricultural outreach that brought in ag people, just like we in Norman had brought in public safety officials. So we were beginning to grow the list of supporters. And this takes us to about 1988. And in 1988, I think we had everything ready, except we didn't have money, but we had everything ready. Knew the problem, knew the solution, knew the followers, knew the believers. We knew just about everything except no money. But we had a plan now written down. And so the provost at the University of Oklahoma said, I'm aware that Governor Henry Bellman now has access to something called oil overcharge funds. And they can be used for anything that increase the energy efficiency of a state. So all we had to do was convince him, and then we might get some money to start this effort. So between Professor Elliott and myself, we developed a strategy. We talked to our leaders at the two universities, and we said, if we could get $2 million out of the state of Oklahoma, will you, Oklahoma State, and will you, the University of Oklahoma, put another $350,000 each for a total of $2.7 million? And that $2.7 million if we got it, would have been enough to carry us about 4 years into the future. We could hire people, we could go look for land where we could put sensors, we could buy some sensors, and we could develop software and keep it all running for about 4 years before we would need a new infusion of money. And so in 1988, we approached Governor Bellman's office, and Governor Bellman was very gracious. He was just couldn't have been any more of a friend. He listened carefully, and he's a good man. He's a smart guy. He made a decision. I think this is worthwhile. I support it. So all we had to do now was get the U.S. Department of Energy to agree that what Governor Bellman wanted to do was energy savings. So when we did that, then the road was clear to proceed. So we made our first hire of a project manager probably in the year, I don't know the year, but it was probably around the year 89 and possibly 90. And we said, okay, you do the Oklahoma Mesonet, it's technology. In the meantime, we're going to be out looking for money when this original $2.7 million runs out. We got a 2-year, maybe a 3-year window. We got to close that gap inside of 3 years.
So how much time did that take finding?
We made
more
hundreds of trips to and from Stillwater, to and from Norman, to and from the state capitol. We met typically every other week, alternating between Stillwater and Norman, and planned every little detail. We had a steering committee of 6. 3 were from Norman, 3 were from Stillwater. And those 6 people forged the pathway ahead by laying out the details of what would be needed to do the Oklahoma Mesonet.
Well, once those initial steps were taken, were there any roadblocks along the way in the early
Not
stages?
really. By the time we got to this point, we were so used to problem solving, there was nothing that made us fearful. So we didn't look at anything that we faced as, oh, that's a killer. We just didn't believe that would happen. We believed that we were doing the right thing for the citizens of Oklahoma. And the legislature and the governor were gracious to get us started, but that was just seed money for 4 years. There was no guarantee we would get new monies. And so we spent the next 2 years, Ron Elliott and I, raising an awareness at the state capitol, both those that supported OSU and those that supported OU, and said, look, this is us together. You want us to work together? We're doing it. Now we need you to consider what we're doing, and if you agree that we're doing a good thing, please consider us at funding allocation time. And it took a while. We did not get much money in those initial years. In fact, we didn't get anything the first year we asked, and we needed it. And what happened is that the governor then vetoed the funding bill that we were in. And so we had ourselves set up, but in the veto we lost. So now it's like Panic City, but no problem, we can solve it. And so we worked with the House and Senate leaders, and we developed a strategy that we would approach each of the cabinet level secretaries and ask them, here's the offering plate, would you contribute $25,000 out of your discretionary money and give it to the Oklahoma Mesonet? And they did. All of them did. Nobody refused us. So we ended up with maybe, well, I don't know how many dollars, but it was $25,000 each times about 8 to 10 secretaries, and that bought us another year. So Okay, no problem. We got another year. So until we're dead, we're not dead.
Well, stressful nights, huh?
No, they were
No?
fun nights. They were like, how can I beat the system and pull a rabbit out of a hat? This was a challenge, and so many people were looking at us. Guys, be successful. There was nobody throwing darts at us. And so right after the failure in that legislative session, we had enough followers that we said, well, who's to say this won't work? Let's try it. So here we are, 2 university professors, and we call each of our followers and say, we need your letter on your letterhead stationery, faxed to the state capitol today, that says, Dear Mr. Senator, or Dear Mr. Representative, please fund the Oklahoma Mesonet. So we inundated the Capitol with about 200 letters. And I'm sure most university faculty would say, you did what?
Nowadays it'd be emails.
Well, of course, but this was more effective, because
Yes,
now
much
you
more.
get something coming out of a
Much more.
machine, you gotta go clear it, you gotta at least look at it before you throw it away. And we didn't find anybody throwing it away. They kept it. And so we could go and talk to anybody pretty much on demand.
Did you celebrate after each one of these successes?
No,
No.
no. It wouldn't be over until we had permanent funding. Everything we were doing was temporary funding. So we just played as if this is the second quarter of the game. We got 2 more quarters to go.
Well, how long did it take to get permanent funding?
It took until about 1998, 1999. I can't remember for sure, but it was almost 10 years from the day we got the first dollars to the day we got permanent funding.
And in those 10 years, you had proved how beneficial it was?
Oh, it was working like a charm, because as Oklahoma State University people said, well, we've got the land at all of our research farms. You guys have got a communication solution. We didn't know how to do the communications. You don't know where to go look for land. We've got agents in every county. We'll help you find the spots. So that's what we did then.
Do you remember the first site?
Yes, it was Stillwater.
Was it?
Yes, we did it on purpose. It's Stillwater. And we loaded it on top of the building that is our telecommunications system. We put it on top of the building so it would transmit by VHF radio the weather signals from the site that was about 5 miles southwest of Stillwater on a research farm. So we had the research farm. It would telecommunicate its data by VHF radio to the receiver on top of the building that houses the OSU PD. And then we were on OLETs. And then within 2 or 3 seconds, we were in Norman with that data. And we waited, we worked hard to make that data be very good and look good, be good, and it was our time to develop the software for display purposes.
Making it applicable to other people too?
Yes. Remember in those days, this is still somewhat the 92, 93 era, there were no fancy laptops or smartphones. We had these clunkers for computers, so it was very difficult to do some of the things we did, but it wasn't impossible.
Was it hard to find the people to fill in the spots that, like when you started the actual office and that sort of thing?
No, we had county agent support, so when we drove from either Stillwater or Norman and we divided up the state, okay, you take this part, I'll take this part. When we went, we used the extension agents to go into the rural areas of that particular county. They knew why we were coming, and so they normally had us set up to see several plots of land, and we eventually secured permission to put our sensors on that, at which point, a few months later, we did put sensors on those. And so in the summer of about 93, we were able to start the process of installing beyond site number 1, Stillwater. I don't know the second site, but we just, in a matter of 6 months, we installed the whole state with 107 sites.
And it went live in?
It went live from day one. From the first hour, everything was live. If we screwed up, if it was not good, we wanted the people to know it wasn't good. So it put pressure on us. But if it was good, we wanted them to see our evolution.
So it was in 94 when the actual...
We were so close to having a fully instrumented network at that time that we chose January the 1st, 1994, as the day we would commission the network as operational. Now, we may not have had every problem solved, but we had enough of them solved that only we knew the things that weren't quite as mature as what people out in other agencies would see. So we commissioned it as operational. We had a Capitol Rotunda ceremony to anoint the Oklahoma Mesonet. We had a number of speakers from the Senate and the House, including Governor Bellman. And at that time, I believe Governor Keating was our governor, and even he was a part of that initial celebration. So we mark our time from January 1st, 1994.
What was the reaction out across the state to what you were doing once it was up?
Some of the people could care less. Some of the people could say, well, that's interesting. Remind me to get involved on that soon. But at least half the people said, this is great. This is what we've been needing. And so that's no problem. It's an opportunity. We still have 50% of the population to reach. That's the opportunity. We've got 50% following us in that community. Let's go get the other 50%. And so we work to show all of the community the value of how this data could be applied. It was not just a weather forecaster's heaven on earth kind of deal. It was in many things beyond a weather forecaster's tool. It was a police department tool for solving murders. It was a fire department tool for knowing when to evacuate a fire truck for a wind shift that was moving into a wildfire that was out of control. We had major tornadoes on occasions, and we had ambulances that went out and came back with patients that had been injured. And the Mesonet was a tool then to communicate more information than just the weather surface observations. And so we grew the network to be a very comprehensive network.
How was it used to solve crimes? I'm just curious.
Somebody in Jay, Oklahoma was found dead. It was near freezing on that day, and the sheriff thought they had a suspect. They listened to the alibi, and they said, I don't think that's true. And so they looked at the Mesonet temperatures to determine, well, when did it go below freezing in this community? And I don't know how they did it, but somehow knowing when it went below freezing and when it was still above freezing, they could pinpoint the time of death to some extent. Well, what that did was disproved this other guy's alibi. So he was arrested and charged with murder.
That was not something you thought would be
No.
the result of this mesonet. No.
Now, if I were to give you one story that is probably the most heartwarming story, it occurred in Enid, Oklahoma at an elementary school. There was a young man there who was using the mesonet in his classroom. He was a problem student. Nobody wanted to teach him, but he had to be taught. So the principal asked his teacher, who knew about the mesonet, would you take this student under your wings? So she said yes, and this F student, who had a terrible attitude, was taken aside by her and said, I need you to help me. I need you to learn the mesonet well enough that you can teach all of your student colleagues in the class. So he did that. And the result was, at the end of the year, he would go outside for recess and play with them. Before, he would not have anything to do with them. So a year later, this F student now is making C's. And this teacher got promoted to the next grade. The principal said, I hate to ask, but would you take this student again? Because none of the other teachers know he's changed. So she said yes. And she did the same thing again. Said, I need you to refresh your memory and then teach the class. And he did. And he did that for a third year, and then he promoted out of her school to junior high. So he goes on into high school age, having now become an AB student with a great deal of self-esteem, self-confidence. And about a year after he should have graduated, which he did do, he called his teacher and said to her, I have some good news. And she said, what? He said, I just received word that my ACT score is so high, I will get a full scholarship to one of the major universities in Oklahoma. And that story is the epitome of what you can do when you look for ways to make things happen. She took him as an F student, and in a matter of a couple of years transformed him to a B student, and then he did the rest, and he got an academic scholarship. So we go from that experience to the Appropriations Committee in the House and the Senate a few months later, and we get 30 minutes to convince them we need your financial support. And they're not necessarily in a giving mood because everybody wants something. But we told this story. Actually, we had the teacher tell the story. And the senator that was running that meeting said, after she had spoken, wouldn't it be nice if we spent money on our students that were problem children and did things that kept them out of jail as opposed to letting them just go into jail? And we're going to pay it either way. Let's pay it on the front end and get them to be a productive part of society. And he then looked at us and said, I think you have your money. So we got our first full funding that year.
What happened to the boy? Do you know?
No, I don't know.
Did he come to OU or OSU?
I prefer not to say.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. But that is a very success story, sure.
Yeah, and who would have thought of that as something in 1984, 85? We weren't thinking those thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
We were thinking weather data for the meteorologists, ag data for when do I plant my corn. That's all we were thinking. And we thought, if we did that, that'd be so good. And then we realized, we're thinking too small. So we expanded our horizons immensely so we could see what could be.
How had the teacher learned how to use it?
We brought her here and taught her.
Brought other teachers across the state?
Yes,
or
we
just,
did. We now have well over 250 teachers that know the Oklahoma Mesonet like the back of their hand. They've been taught and mentored to use it, and they know how they can use it in their classroom and still satisfy core teaching requirements. So we taught them all of that. The software, what does this data mean? How do you turn on your computer? This is what happens when it won't boot. This is how you reboot it. We were at ground zero in the computer era. And so we taught them from the ground up. And we learned, but they also helped us learn because teachers are very patient. You mean somebody on the outside wants to help me do a better job? Well, yes, I'll help you. So they were the perfecters of our software. We'd develop it, then we'd say, what do you think? And they'd tell us what was wrong with it, and we'd go back and fix it and make it better. And then when it was to their liking, they'd say, that's good stuff. And we've continued that model and that evolution even through today.
It's a good way to increase your fan base too.
Oh, of course, of course.
And the lobbying too.
Yes.
Besides the education system, what have been some of the other users?
Well, researchers everywhere. We have had probably over 300 journal articles in the refereed literature that use Mesonet data published. 300 referees that are critically looking for, do I accept this or not? So we have appealed to many scientists. Some of those are students, and so they learned the Mesonet from the get-go. We've had student operators that work out of the building here in Norman whose job it is to keep everything flowing, and if the problem develops, they're the first line of defense. And out of those experiences, some of our people have gone on to wonderful jobs. One guy got a job out of here. He was hired at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. He was hired to be a hacker for the computer systems of NASA. And not that they wanted hacking, but they wanted to figure out where are our weaknesses, and they had heard about this individual, and his experiences here got him a good job, a very good job.
How did the local weather people react to it?
Well, we asked them all, please mention the Mesonet on the air when you use it, because the senators and representatives are listening. And if they never hear it, then they'll think it's your network. And if they think it's your network, they won't fund the Oklahoma Mesonet. So not all of them do that, but that's okay. We're stable today, and our foundation is solid. So they use it all the time. In fact, I would say I doubt that any one of them would give it up if faced with that option. They would not give it up for anything. It's a good data set for their jobs.
Well, in the early days, were there any conflicts with them, or was it just smooth sailing? You predict something that they didn't, or?
Well, that always happens. That
Predict
happens
before they
even
do.
today. No, when you bring people together and you're all using the same data, the odds are you're going to come to the same conclusion. It's when I'm over here working and I have a data set, but you don't have it, and you're over here working and you have a data set, but I don't have it, that I become suspicious of you and you of me. And it's when we pull our data together and share it equally, that people cooperate.
Was the relationship with the National Weather Center smooth too, or was there some rocky
Very
times?
smooth, I think. I'm not saying there were never any problems, but there were nothing that was insurmountable. Every problem we faced, we could find a solution.
Are you still involved with some of the Mesonet
No,
business?
I felt that my time, after 20 years, it was time to have a new generation take over and lead it. And yeah, I do a little bit through students, and I keep my head informed of what they're doing, the Mesonet team is doing. But I think there comes a time when you have to let the next generation take it and improve upon it. So they've done well. They've done very well.
Did you think when you first started this that we'd be sitting here 20 years later?
We had no idea of that. We didn't even dream of 20 years. We were dreaming, oh man, if we could just get the permanent funding. Oh, if we could just get another $25,000, we could afford to do this. And so we were looking year to year for a while.
And this was in addition to your regular job.
Oh yes, I had classes to teach, as did Professor Elliott. I had students to mentor at the graduate level, PhD and MS, as did Professor Elliott. And I was director of the climate survey. So I had those administrative responsibilities. But we had good people. We hired good people, both in Stillwater and in Norman. And even today, we have a couple of people from the Stillwater campus that are housed here on the University of Oklahoma campus in the Mesonet offices. And they proudly display their OSU flags. And with all the windows we have, people walk by and say, what is that flag doing up? Does President Boren approve of that? And the answer is very simple. Well, of course he does, because it's the Oklahoma Mesonet, and it's a two-university effort.
It's been amazing too for them to work so long together without any major issues.
None. Every vote that we've ever taken on any subject, hiring somebody, buying something, terminating something, all of our votes are unanimous. Not a single vote out of hundreds of votes we've had to take. The steering committee voting, okay, I vote that we purchase these sensors. I vote that we hire this man. All of those votes were unanimous. So the people in Stillwater agreed with the people in Norman and vice versa. We were a team, and we never used the word OU or OSU. We just talked about the Mesonet team.
How did you come up with the name Oklahoma Mesonet?
Well, we knew the word Oklahoma needed to be in it. That was pretty obvious. Meso is a meteorology word. It means small scale. It means weather phenomena that are on the scale of tornadoes and thunderstorms. So when you study mesoscale meteorology, you're studying those phenomena. So we wanted a network that would measure small-scale phenomena. And some of it was weather-related, but some of it turned out to be agricultural-related. And it was a network, so we just put the words together and called it the Oklahoma Mesonet. And we even took a vote. Should we call this the Oklahoma Mesonet, or should we call it something else? Because nobody knows what the word Mesonet means. But the attitude was, they'll get to know it. If we don't teach them, we failed. So we voted unanimously to adopt the name the Oklahoma Mesonet.
Was it trademarked?
No.
I don't guess it needed to be it
No.
necessarily.
No. Who's going to take it?
Were other states coming to see how you did
many,
things?
many states. We got invitations to go, and we had hostings from not only U.S. states, but many international countries came to us. Now, how did you do this? Why'd you do it that way? So we were a teacher facility for people outside the borders of Oklahoma.
Have any of them done it as well as?
None.
That's a loaded question too.
No, none have done it as well as we have done it. Now, I realize that I'm the co-developer and I may be biased, but quite honestly, I don't believe they have. And just about 3-4 years ago, the National Research Council did a study of a national mesonet. And in that study, in their first set of words, they talked about the gold standard Oklahoma Mesonet. So there are people on the outside that look at us as, you guys are the gold standard. You set the pace, you set the curve. We need to follow that example.
It was a little pressure to keep setting the pace.
Of course. But with that word, hey, Mr. Senator, did you know we're the gold standard for the nation? People are coming here. That's a form of tourism to Oklahoma.
Sure. And if Governor Bellman hadn't said yes, we might not be sitting here.
That is true.
Or you were determined enough to get it somehow.
Well, we were determined, but I think Governor Bellman was the wise one of the bunch. He was a farmer. He was used to working outside against the elements, and he understood the value of information when you have to make economic decisions on a barely making it farm or ranch. So we had, I think his mental state was one probably favorable, but we never asked him that.
Well, I think he was also for everybody coming together to work together.
Yes.
Too, no matter.
Now, he was an OSU person in the sense that if you ask what loyalty might he have, well, he might have said, I support OSU, and there's nothing wrong with that. The governor can support whoever he wants. But when he was the governor, he said, no, it's bigger than OSU. It's all of us.
Was there something that surprised you along the way?
Such as, maybe
a success or a solution to a problem that just popped? I don't know, just anything you weren't expecting?
There were no surprises in that it was like, oh my goodness, that happened? No, we never had that kind of moment, but we had moments once or twice a year where we'd look back. What have we accomplished? What are our chief accomplishments? Because that's what the Senate and the House always wanted to know. What are you doing that my constituents want to fund? And by the way, who in my district uses this system? So we had to know their districts well enough to know who was using it. We had to verify that if he or she went and asked, tell me about the Mesonet, that they would be able to do so. So it was a huge educational effort, and we did it.
You almost had to have a dedicated staff person keeping up with how it was used across the state?
Yeah, we had lots of legwork. We had to apply for FCC license to our radio transmitters. We'd never done that before. That in itself is a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare because the forms are hard to understand, but you got to do it. You got to send it here before they send it there. That was probably among the hardest things that we had to do, was get a license by the FCC to transmit using OLEDs, or transmit to OLEDs.
Was it hard to get space in this building as part
No.
of the National Weather System?
No. When this building was divvied up, I kept my mouth shut for a while, though I knew what was happening. There was no reason to go fight a battle if the floor space on the fourth floor was being divided among agencies. It was only when we got to a floor that we cared about, that I would need to get involved. And so the PhD scientist in this building says, oh, I don't want to be near the front door. All those people will come into the building. They'll all stop by my office. They'll all say, where's the restroom, or where's so-and-so's office? We don't want to be the information center for those people. And I said, we do. We want to be the information center. So we then asked for second floor space by the doors so that we could be visible to anybody who would come and go.
You had it all figured out.
Not too bad.
I'm impressed.
Well, it's because in 1988 we had to write a proposal that was about half an inch thick. So we had to put all of our thoughts down, and we had to make it convincing. It had to be good English so that people that were not scientists would understand it. But that exercise is what gave us the roadmap, and we never deviated from that roadmap. What we do today is what that 1988 plan said.
Well, that's impressive too.
Nothing that I recall is different.
About how long of time did it take you to come up with that, though, actually, the finished product?
6 months.
With all 6 of you working on it, or however many?
I was the primary author
Mostly? Okay.
in this case.
And you would do it all again?
Absolutely. This was fun. This is what made leaving the U.S. Weather Service and coming to the University of Oklahoma such a privilege and such an opportunity. Wow, I can do things for the citizens of our state that I could never do in a Weather Service facility. Now, I might do a good job in a Weather Service facility, but I'd only impact tens of people. In the Mesonet, we impact thousands and thousands. And if we were to do a list of all the good things that have happened, that's an accomplishment, that's an accomplishment, and string that list out, it's well over 1,000 testimonials that I could give you. And they're all different. And very few of them are pure meteorologists.
That may have something to do with you being seen as the Oklahoma's weather icon. Several people have referred to you as that, that's why.
Oh, really? Well, there's at least one person in Oklahoma City that won't refer to me as that way.
Okay. You don't have to say who.
The system runs on autopilot. We've geared it that way because we're not here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We only operate the climate survey from about 7 a.m.-ish to about 10 p.m.-ish. So the midnight hours, there's nobody here. So if something breaks, we got to get it fixed. And what we set up was, well, what we wanted to avoid was, can't have us show up at the next morning and, oh, the system went down last night? How come I didn't know it? Oh, all those people are unhappy at us? So we had computers watching computers. And when the computers detected a fault over here, it would send out a page, and we would page our employees. So we could dial in and check it ourselves as a human being, and then determine whether or not we needed to come to take care of a glitch. So that's one thing that we do that's quite innovative, I believe. We just run it on autopilot. Many of the other agencies don't know how we get away with it. I just returned from Korea. Koreans are intending to run their network 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that means you have some of your smartest, brightest people working from midnight to sunrise when their brain is not necessarily functioning. Well, we wanted to save our brain power for the problems we would solve during the daylight hours, because that's when most humans do their best.
In that same vein, you did that with data to make sure the data was
Yes.
accurate, or
Not accurate. We could never totally verify that it was accurate automatically in the early days, but we could verify that it was being updated, and that was important. We needed to not break the data stream coming from all of those sites to OLEDs. I mean, think of that. We have 107 now, almost 120 sites. We have probably 30 or so repeaters that take a site, repeat it over here, and then bounce that up to this OLEDs facility over here. All of those computers talk to each other every 5 minutes, 24 hours a day. And yeah, every once in a while, the phone company has a problem, somebody cuts a line, and that's unavoidable. But we know when that happens, that's okay. We can't solve that one. That's the phone company problem.
where's all this data kept?
Here in this building on this floor. And then we make multiple archive copies and put it in a safety deposit box at some bank here in town. I don't know exactly where we keep it. I've sort of forgotten, but we don't, the archives are our legacy.
Sure, 20 years worth.
20 years, nobody has a climate network of this quality. Nobody of this quality, this long, this comprehensive over us.
They'll be coming to you to see if the weather has, if the climate has really changed.
Well, it's exactly what is our next opportunity on the horizon, is that we should start now appealing not just to the weather people and to the ag people, but to the climate change people.
You have someone on staff that's looking at that sort of thing too?
Not
Not really.
yet. But then, I didn't do it when I was the director. It just didn't seem like that's where we needed to put our resources. Our resources were tight when I left in 2010, but I did a few things in my last few months that gave us a fairly large pool of money coming from Washington, D.C., and it comes with almost no strings attached. That's in itself is an accomplishment. And it's discretionary money we can use to run the network. On the other hand, the new director of the survey has been quite successful himself at raising additional pools of money, and Governor Fallon has helped by approving some upgrade capabilities to our technology. And so she allowed a pool of money to come our way for the purposes of updating things that will date themselves.
It's just amazing how all that's come together.
Well, we had a team from the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. We asked them to come and just sort of critically analyze what have we done. And so we threw wide open our books and wide open our software and wide open everything. Let them see anything. And then they deliberated for a day or so. And then in their debriefing of us, they said, "This is truly amazing. This is truly amazing. You guys have done this network there is no mandate to do it. You don't have any paperwork that says thou shalt do the Oklahoma Mesonet. We don't have a roadmap that says this is your mission. So they were amazed that we did all of this with just handshakes. And that's what we did, a handshake.
Even with the sites?
Even with the sites. Out of all of our sites, 20 years in, I bet we have moved no more than 10 sites in 20 years. Those people are happy with us. In fact, if you try to move it, they'll say, you're not taking my Mesonet station. They love it.
You don't have to pay?
I don't pay.
them.
We don't pay any rent. So that was a cost-cutting measure. Didn't pay anything for privilege of using OLEDs. That was a cost-cutting measure. That's what made it affordable. We used the resources we had available. And where we could save big dollars, we did. No rent, no telecommunications. So all of our money that we raised, and it's hard to raise, all of it went to either the people we hired or the sensors that we bought or the automobiles to go to and from, the lawnmowers to cut the grass, the things that you have to do to keep the details under control.
Mow the grass. I hadn't thought of that one, but I guess you have to.
In eastern half of Oklahoma, if you don't mow the grass will be taller than the ring gauge. In fact, it will reach up to the temperature and relative humidity sensor. It'll be that tall. It'll be head height for me. So we gotta mow it.
And did you know that from the beginning, or did you?
Well, I think we suspected it, but what we didn't know was, oh my goodness, we gotta do it how often? Once a week? Everywhere? Well, no, we don't have to do it that way west of I-35, for example, except maybe in an unusual case or two, but the sites east of I-35, we have to stay on top of it. But we take photos of everything we do. When we arrive at every site, we take a photo. When we leave, we take a photo. Those are online, so you can look at 20 years of showing up for duty to fix a site, to maintain a site, to check it out. You can see how well we've done. And those are all online. You can see it on the internet. We want people to see what we've done, because if they see, they're going to be our friends. If they don't see, they're going to wonder, what are you doing with that money?
Well, you do some products now that you sell, that are sold? Or?
We tried that for a while, but that didn't go over very well.
Or do the weather stations channels have to pay a fee or something?
Yes, they still pay a fee. They're the only ones that I believe pay a fee. The TV stations across Oklahoma all pay a fee. Now, we've tried to keep it very, very low, but the fact that they do gives us an answer to the question, is anybody think highly enough of this data to pay for it?
Mm-hmm.
So our answer is now, yes, they do. Well, who? Well, let me tell you. The TV meteorologists in Oklahoma City and Tulsa and in Sherman Denison. They all do.
And then I'm supposing you get requests for research data from like dissertation students and such.
If it's for an educational project, the cost is about as close to zero as we can make it. But it does take somebody some time to go pull data and mail it out, and those are real costs that I will get billed, or the climate survey will get billed. And so we never say, well, this is to an OSU person, so what's the right accounting code to use that? And we don't do that. It's the state of Oklahoma money, And we just say, they helped us raise this money, they can help us spend it, and we'll spend it equally no matter who the user is. So if somebody wanted to buy the whole archive, 20 years worth of data, that would be probably pretty expensive, because out of that is all of our legacy, all of our good science that we want to do, because we worked hard to get this. And so our scientists don't want to give away the farm. They want the opportunity to see things first because they've worked to make it happen. So we didn't want to be known as data lackeys for the nation. We wanted to be respected. If they wanted our data, they had to invite us to their table, and they do now. So we become a junior author in many of their scientific works.
Do you still do some of that yourself?
No, I don't have time. I just came back from 4 years in Korea, and that was a totally different job.
Doing weather-related things? Or?
Weather-related. I was working for the president of South Korea to help modernize the Korean weather services.
That must have been fascinating too.
It was, but it wouldn't have happened if I had not been a beneficiary of a good reputation, and the Mesonet created that good reputation.
Was it hard to retire in 2010 and turn this over to someone else?
Yes. But I prefer to go out on top as opposed to go out and everybody saying, well, he should have gone out 5 years ago. No, I prefer to hand it off when we're doing very well. That there isn't a crisis around the corner and got to lay off half the staff. I did not, if that would have been the case, I would not have retired.
You pleased with it so far, with how they've proceeded without you?
Yes. Yes, I am. And I will say that a large percentage of our software and development concepts have come from the young people who grew up in Oklahoma. These are not ideas we ported from Washington, D.C. or California or you name it. These are homegrown people who were talented. We were smart enough to see the real talents we needed, and we hired mostly Oklahoma people. Though if we found a good out-of-stater, we would hire them. But the Oklahoma people normally would stand up very well against external competitors. And so everything you see is, for the most part, been developed by Oklahomans.
That speaks good too.
I think that's a great testimony.
And then most of them have stayed for quite a while as well.
We have almost no turnover. Nobody leaves.
That says something too.
Yeah. And I don't mind it, but I felt that if I left, their comfort level would be adjusted a little bit. Oh my goodness, there's a change at the top. Maybe I need to work better and harder for the next person so that they'll want to come here. I mean, just some change is really healthy for the system. And I felt this was healthy because we had adequate money and we had wonderful people.
And the emergency management system still pleased with the service?
I was
public safety, I should say.
With a public safety audience here in this building about 2 weeks ago, and I made a couple of comments to them at their lunch break, and I was not on their program, but I got to make a couple of minutes of comments. And then when I sat down, they said, if it hadn't been for you, we wouldn't be here today. And I said, well, that's nice of you to say so, but this was a team effort. We did it together. They said, oh yeah, but you were the start. Well, okay, maybe I did a lot to begin, but eventually it's a team effort all the way.
One person could not have done
One person could not have done it. OU could not have done this without OSU.
And the other way around. Yeah.
And the other way around. So we knew we needed each other, and when you know you need each other, you cooperate.
And Oklahoma's a better place for it.
Well, it's a very famous network. There are a lot of people outside the state of Oklahoma that know very well what it is, and they're not meteorologists necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we just got an award called the Larry Johnson Public Service Award for 20 years of sustained superior performance at running the Oklahoma Mesonet, the nation's gold standard network.
Sustained, that's a good word too for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Plans to celebrate for 20 years next year, or wait for 25?
I think we're no, we'll have a 20-year celebration. We don't miss the biggies. We had I think we had a 5 and a 10-year in the Capitol Rotunda again. We had different people because new politicians, but that's okay. They willingly came. I think we'll do something big here. I don't know the details because I'm not here as much.
Hopefully it will include the teacher.
Yeah, she's one of many that are loyal followers and users.
Well, is there anything that you would have changed, knowing what you know now, looking back over? Is there something that you might have done a little bit different?
No, there's always something minor that you could have done different. Maybe I should have been more disciplined to do my own bookkeeping. Maybe I should have been more disciplined to write research proposals, but I didn't have enough time. And so I look back and say, what would I have added? What would I have subtracted? And I'm sure Professor Elliott feels the same way. It worked out where this is so good, why change it? It's working. And the partnership continues unabated.
Well, what do you see for the next 20 years?
I think if we sustain it for another 20, which I believe we will now that we're here, we will have the world coming to our doorstep saying, there's only one place in this world that has trustworthy climate data. We need to take a good look at some of your data to try to better understand how the earth and the atmosphere work together. So I think we will appeal to the climate community more with time.
Has it had much impact on the new, like the wind power?
Yes, the wind power initiative began because we identified through the Mesonet observations where the windiest spots were in Oklahoma. So we knew immediately you should go to this ridge, not this ridge, to place the wind sensors. So it wasn't just the data, it was a geography faculty that used some of their techniques plus our wind data to decide this area in here is perfect for a wind farm. This area over here is not so good. I don't know how they did it, but they used Mesonet data to dictate where they should tell the wind farm industry where they would get their best return on their investment.
Do you know if other states have looked at that too?
Yes.
Well, they don't have the data, I guess.
They don't have the data, but they've looked at it. And they have asked us for our data so that they can at least try a second-hand calibration of what data they do have. But that's always hard. But I think, yeah, we had an impact in Oklahoma. I doubt we've had a huge impact outside of Oklahoma.
Do you think there's new measurements to be had as, you know, new elements, like something else to measure, like the wind blowing way up there versus down here, or?
Well, if we go higher than 10 meters, which is 33 feet, we're going to have FCC approval to raise those towers, and then we'll have to put night lights on them if they go too tall. And then we've got the problem of guy wires. How do you get up to the top of the tower when we often have our maintenance people out by themselves? How do they lower that tower? We don't want them to climb it. We want them to lower it. Well, that's hard to do when it's a 100-foot tower. So I think we have got to be content. We did the best we could with what we had. We'll wait on satellite technology to look in from the top side, and we will look out from the bottom side. And that will be the right marriage of technologies.
Well, it's like the right marriage of universities now.
Mm-hmm.
If there's anything else you want to add before we close off? Favorite memory?
They're all favorites. There's so many good ones. I mean, I can wake up every morning with a smile, thinking, maybe I made a difference. Maybe my mother would be proud.
I don't think there's any maybe. I think she would be. And I think you have. And I thank you for that.
Okay.
Thank you for your time, too.
You're most welcome.